My name's Robbie Luckett. Today is Tuesday, November the 2nd. It's approximately 9:04 a.m. Central Standard Time. I'm professor of history and director of the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University, joined today with Joy Kinard. Joy, will you, for our record, state your name and spell it for us?
Yes, it's Joy, which is spelled J-O-Y. The last name is Kinard, and that's spelled K-I-N-A-R-D. In some places in the country, it's pronounced Kinard, but the past two generations, we've been pronouncing it Kinard. That's in South Carolina, where my grandfather was from.
Thanks. I can't wait to learn more. Do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do have permission to record this interview.
Okay, let's go back to where you just were. Let's start with some background biographical information. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, how you grew up. Tell us about your folks, your education, those sorts of things.
Okay, sure. So I was born in Washington, D.C. I am the middle daughter of three girls. Sarah was my oldest sister. Hope is my younger sister. My parents, Marjorie and John Kinard, they met in college at Livingstone College. We grew up AME Zion. My grandmothers on both sides of my family and grandfathers also were AME Zion, reared my parents in the AME Zion Church. And both of them went to Livingstone College, which is an AME Zion school. And quite honestly, you get kicked out the family if you don't go there. All my sisters, cousins, aunts, and uncles went to Livingstone College. We're staunch AME Zionites. My father was a minister, a trained minister in the AME Zion Church at Hood Theological Seminary. And during his youth, as well as my mother's youth, when they were college students, they were part of the civil rights movement. And so I happened to be reared and raised by civil rights activists. So we were, when I say we, I mean my sisters and I were encouraged to have a voice, encouraged to be change agents, and be leaders, really, just like my parents were. We saw them in action. Sometimes we'd be coming home from school, and before we actually went home, we went to my grandmother's house. We'll wait there until my parents picked us up. And on our way home, we would have to go to meetings, community meetings. And so we saw them in action. We saw people fussing and mad about stuff. And it was like a soap opera. So we really understood early on how to be a part of the community and what the importance of how meetings can make changes in people's lives, and how you have to be a part of progress. And a lot of times, that sacrifice of sleep and watching TV when you're young. So that's really the kind of home I grew up in. We went to church a lot. We were part of civic organizations, NAACP, National Council of Negro Women, other groups that are not as national, but are well known in Washington. Saturday was never a dull moment. You wake up at 6 and you get home at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I mean, I was young, like 7 and 8, having that stamina. So that's kind of how I grew up as a Kinard. I went to DC public schools. Right after my father died, my mother decided to move to North Carolina. So I did do a year of school there. I really took his death hard. And so you will be shocked to know that I got in a lot of fights and disagreements with people. When I was in North Carolina, I didn't take the move well. And so I moved back to DC, ended my high school year there. We left in my 10th grade year. I went back in my 11th grade year, graduated from Dunbar High School in DC, and then went back to North Carolina because my mom was like, how am I going to get 3 girls through college, as a widow? So she actually moved to North Carolina, got a job at Livingstone. And, I knew I was going there after I got out of high school. So returned there and went to Livingstone, moved back to DC. When I was at Livingstone every summer and Christmas break, I worked for the National Park Service as a student intern. My uncle got me that job because my uncle, William Kinard, was one of the first Black Park Rangers in the National Park Service. He was stationed at the Grand Tetons. And so there was a push during the Kennedy administration to get HBCU students to work at national parks, and he was one of about 50. So he went there, and so I got in the Park Service. When I graduated from Livingstone, I got a permanent position at the Frederick Douglass Home, which was my first park. Now 18 national parks later, I'm a superintendent. This is my 25th year in the Park Service. I got my 25-year pin, which I'm really happy about this year. So I did go to Howard University for my master's in history and majored in public history, and got my PhD in US history with a minor in Caribbean studies and public history from Howard. Finished there in 2009, and pretty much live in Montgomery, Alabama right now, but I have lived in Washington, DC, Atlanta, Ohio, and now I'm in Montgomery. So the job has taken me those different places.
There's so much for us to talk about, but I do think that it's probably worthwhile for the purposes of this interview and oral history collection related to the Association of African American Museums, if you wouldn't mind taking a second and talking about your dad.
Oh, sure.
His relationship to the Black Museum movement.
Sure. So John Kinard was my father. He was actually the subject of my research at Howard University. He was the first Black director of a Smithsonian museum. He was quite influential. He was actually hired uniquely by the community. And so very unique concept that S. Dillon Ripley, the secretary at the time, had for a museum that was really run by the community and was empowered to make a difference in the community. And so because he was so active in the community and because he was so well-rounded, I mean, my father knew Swahili. He had worked for years in Operation Crossroads Africa in Kenya and in parts of South Africa. When he was a student at Hood Theological Seminary, he went there on assignment to help build villages, build facilities, all kinds of facilities, from schools, actual bricks and mortar, to soccer fields. I mean, and he was side by side with students from Amherst, Tufts, Spelman. I mean, he really was quite a unique person. And that experience really helped him develop a international view of not only himself, but the influence of the Black experience. And so he met the presidents of recently liberated countries when he was there. And he writes about it in letters, love letters to my mother, which I do have in the book I published about him and his time in the Smithsonian. So he was just not a community activist. He had a global view on the Black experience. And he brought that to the Smithsonian, he brought that to Anacostia, and he treated his job like one of those African villages that he was trying to transform and help. You know, there were times where people would call our house or come to our house to get, for my father to get their son out of jail, or some big disagreement occurred and he would have to get out of bed, or some person's child was on drugs, he would, you know, help them. Somebody needed a job. I vividly remember one of our neighbors was about to lose their house in a week. And because of these relationships he had with bankers and just people in Washington, he was able to make a difference. And so he had a different view about community. He wasn't just the director of a museum. People came to him because he was kind of a conduit, someone who passed through things, resources, help. You know, a lot of the staff he had at Anacostia, he married them because he was a licensed minister. He gave their kids jobs. You know, he did so much for people. And so I think that outside of him being a director, he was also respected by a lot of people. I remember Lonnie Bunch telling me when I was interviewing for him for my research that he looked up to my father so much. And when he started working at CAM in California, my father came out there to see one of his legendary exhibits, and my father told him he loved it and did a good job, how much it meant to him. I mean, you know, it's just been great having a parent, actually parents, because I can't leave my mother out, who you can be proud of, you know, but there are times where you wish they were around more, which is something that did happen. He didn't spend a lot of time with us because he was constantly traveling with the Smithsonian, traveling to museums, helping museum professionals do better, be better. You know, it was a lot. He was really overwhelmed and stressed, but he enjoyed his job. You could really tell. So I know I may not have gotten to too much, but I wanted to just paint a picture of the person he was in so many words, Robbie.
Yeah, I mean, that's really wonderful. And he clearly had a deep influence on your life. You wrote your dissertation about him, a book about him.
Yes.
You mentioned CAM. I'll just clarify, that's the California African American Museum.
Yes, that's right.
And then you've said it a few times, but Anacostia. This was the museum, the Smithsonian Museum that he led.
Yes, from 1967 to 1989 when he died. It was founded in 67.
And really a proud civil rights movement like your parents were.
Yes, very much, very much, very much. And so his strategy for leadership and being vocal about the needs of Black museums was birthed out of that time, was birthed out of the Dr. King time, the Stokely Carmichael time, the John Lewis time, where you use nonviolence, but you use your voice and people in groups to help you move situations and change situations. And as time progressed, that didn't always work well for him, which is what I assessed when I did my research. And the Smithsonian, you know, is just a different organization, but he was sometimes not well liked by a lot of people, even some of the Black leadership, because of his strategies. And they really couldn't understand who he was. You know, he was a civil rights leader. He was an activist. I mean, he was in the sit-ins. You know, him and his minister friends, they were in Africa changing the countries that have been under colonial rule. You know, he was teaching Africans about these American civil rights strategies, you know, and then you plop him in the Smithsonian, which is one of the most elitist groups in the world. And he's like, we ain't going to take this. You know, you going to do X, X, and X. And I don't care if you don't like it. You know, it was just unreal. So, very unique person. And my mother was no nonsense too. So.
Well, a really incredible legacy, but this is also really about you, not just your dad, but
Right.
Incredibly important context for who you are. You mentioned your education and Howard and your public history and history programs. Yes. There will be students who are listening to these, and I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind describing what you studied, what the curriculum was like, and what that educational experience was like for you leading up into what has been an incredibly fruitful career in the National Park Service, which we'll talk about too.
Okay. So, you know, Robbie, it's funny how you do something every day, but you don't realize it's a professional field, you know? And I'll say that by saying this, you know, I was a student intern in college at the Frederick Douglass home, greeting visitors, running the bookstore, turning on the film, walking groups all the way up the hill to his home, giving tours through his house, doing visitation, which are statistics that we have to do every day, every month, every year for the Park Service, doing anything they asked me to do. But I never realized that those actions were the basis of public history. And so when I finally talked to Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis, who was the creator of the program and my advisor and professor, you know, it was just amazing at how, you know, it's helped me so much professionally to go into Howard and really understand what I was doing or what I could do to further my career as a trained public historian. So I was at the Robert E. Lee home at the time. At this time, I had left the Douglass home. I had gotten a promotion into the Park Ranger series. It's called Ranger Careers. I was working on the George Washington Memorial Parkway, where there are 11 units, well, parks up and down the parkway, presidential memorials. And then I was asked by the superintendent of the parkway to go to the Robert E. Lee home because she was having some issues with the Arlington chapter of the NAACP, well, the branch there. So she needed me to go and help her figure this thing out. So I went to the Robert E. Lee home. It wasn't a place that I wanted to be, but I said to myself, I had to talk through it. You know, Joy, how are you going to do this? Number one, how are you going to drive into a cemetery every day, which has its own issues? How are you going to be in the leader of the Confederate Army's home every day and talk about him, his life, his children, his wife's connections to Mount Vernon and Martha Washington, their connections to enslavement. How are you going to do this every day? How can you be proud of that? So I had to say, Audrey Calhoun asked me to do it. I like her. She got me a lot of opportunities. She actually wrote my recommendation in the Howard. We were, I think, pretty close. And she was one of the first Black women superintendents that I said, if she can do it, I think I can do it too. So I went for those reasons, and it was there that I got introduced to the public history program at Howard. And I started there. Shortly after I got in, I ended up going to the Mary McLeod Bethune home, which was not too far away from Howard and was my favorite national park to work in. There, I was able to use a lot of the work I was doing as assignments for the public history program and some of my other history classes. And so when you go to Howard's public history program, you are taught by archivists at the National Archives. You're taught by archivists at Moreland Spingarn Research Center. You're taught by people who have been part of films. Dr. Rowe, he was a film specialist at the National Archives, and he had done a lot of work with Spike Lee and some other Black filmmakers. And, he was my film teacher, and so you look at all of these different elements of how to preserve the Black experience through all of these mediums, whether it's film, whether it's, processing collections and what that means, whether it's, oral history with, Dr. Rowe, who was a Garveyite. He wrote a lot of things on Marcus Garvey. He had an archives. His home was actually built around his collections that he had gotten over time. I mean, he had all kind of comic books, and he would invite us to his house every year. Students, I mean, you don't get that at every college, that your professor opens up their door to their home and shows you how you can preserve the research you are developing as a student, because he did that. Talking about travels, I have classmates today that I still talk about, things to what they're doing. I mean, there's this camaraderie that is developed when you have these different experiences. I don't know, it's just unbelievable. You're able to go to see testimony on in the US Capitol. Some of my friends have done that with regard to their research. And so being in Washington, being in DC, of course, having the Smithsonian there and their library and their collections is also a part of the experience too. I won't go into huge detail, but it's just incredible. It is incredible. I actually had the opportunity to have Robert Stanton, the first Black director of the National Park Service. He was a professor of mine at Howard. He was a visiting professor, and we had those a lot. I forget the man's name. Donald Ritchie, the man who made oral history what it is. He also was a lecturer at Howard. He had done oral histories of congressmen. He worked, in the US Senate and Congress as an oral historian, as a historian. I mean, that's the type of education I got at Howard. So when you think of oral, of public history, and you think of, going to a place for school, I think Howard gave me the best of the best that I could have gotten anywhere in the country, because DC is the place to be when it comes to public history. It just is.
And I use the Ritchie's oral history book in my oral history class in public history.
Yeah, we did too. When he came to our class, and I'm like, wait a second, you are this person. You know, he signed our books. He talked to us. He told us things that I don't think he told anyone else about experiences he had, how to not mess up. You know, it was just unreal to hear it from the king of public of history, of oral history. You know, it was just unreal. It really was.
And there, you sounds like you were begin a career in the National Park Service that you've never left. Frederick Douglass home, the Robert E. Lee House. What an amazing,
I know, right?
experience.
I
Tell
know.
us more about not just those places, but your path over the last 25 years and 18 national park sites.
18.
Wow. Tell us about that path to where you are now.
So Robbie, I started at the Frederick Douglass home in 1994 as I was ending up my freshman year of college, going into my sophomore year. Started there, graduated in 98, got a permanent position, left there in 2000, went to the George Washington Memorial Parkway. I didn't want to leave, you know, but I wanted to grow. I needed more money, you know? And so I got into ranger careers on the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Then, as I mentioned to you, I went to the Robert E. Lee home. I was asked to go there by Audrey Calhoun, stayed there for about 2 years, actually, and then went to the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House, National Historic Site. And there I just fell in love. I fell in love with a place where I talked about people who look like me and were Black women who cared about the masses. You know, a place where women were encouraged to have a voice, be educated, and do anything they wanted to do, regardless of the marginalized society we were born into. And there, Black women were attorneys, Black women were professors, Black women were housewives, if you wanted to be, but they were the housewives of Ralph Bunche and these famous men. And then there were women who were maids, you know, who had an outlet of allies. And so that was just a place I could have stayed forever, honestly. But I didn't. From there, I went to Wolf Trap National Park for the Performing Arts, was the chief of interpretation there, looking at the performances. I managed 1,000 ushers and a staff that managed the Children's Theater in the Woods there. And then we actually had shows at night in the large Filene Center, and all of the ushers were supervised by me. And so I actually had other people under me that helped me manage that, you know, the staff, but it was a great experience being there. Then I worked at, I went back to the Bethune home. Then I went to Fort Washington, where I managed Fort Washington Park, Harmony Hall, Fort Foote, Piscataway Park, where we work with the Piscataway Indian Nation, and Marshall Hall, which used to be a small amusement park. Then from there, I went back to the Mary McLeod Bethune home, and actually managed it then. I actually manage not only the home, but the National Archives for Black Women's History, which was another facility behind the house. Then after that, I went down to the Martin Luther King home in Atlanta, came back to DC. I worked at Oxon Hill Farm. Then I went to the Robert E. Lee home. And of course, you know, the Oxon Hill Farm has a couple of other parks connected to it. And so, after I worked at the Oxon Hill Farm, I actually got a promotion to go to be a superintendent at the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. And so I went there to Ohio, loved it, stayed there 6 years. Then I got the position here in Alabama, came here, I managed 3 national parks. Now, when I was at the Mary McLeod Bethune home, I also managed the Capitol Hill parks. And that was about 17 parks and squares alone, but that was one specific park. And then also the Bethune home was the management, had the management for 3 concession sites where we had Langston Golf Course, James Creek Marina, and Buzzard Point Marina, which are on the opposite side of the Anacostia River. So I also managed those sites in addition to the Bethune home. I just didn't want to forget those. So came down here to Alabama, and now I manage the Tuskegee Institute National Historic Site, which encompasses the George Washington Carver Museum on the campus of Tuskegee University, the home of Booker T. Washington. He called it the Oaks. And so we have his home that we manage, which is also on the campus of Tuskegee University. And this is the only national park in the system that is on an active college campus. So I also manage the Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site, where the Tuskegee Airmen were trained here in Alabama to learn how to fly in preparation for them to move into World War II, as pilots. And then I manage the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, which is a trail. It's technically not a park. And so I actually administer that trail. So this trail is 54 miles. It starts in Selma, Alabama, and goes into Montgomery. And this trail marks the Selma to Montgomery March. It also marks the Bloody Sunday March, as well as Turnaround Tuesday March. And so it's just a fabulous story that's connected to voting rights here in Alabama, that was led by so many men and women and people of other races, religions, and nationalities that, I'm humbled by to even manage that site. And so that's what I'm doing now, Robbie. And so I have an archives and collection. I have actually my first scientific collection, and that's been a lot of fun. We had an assessment of a lot of our collections, and boy, I tell you, Dr. Carver was really doing some amazing things during his time. And so we've done a lot of assessments to our collections and are trying to move it into we're trying to move it into a unique place. So we have what we need in order to have them sustain their shelf life. So, and of course, Booker T. Washington's collection. We have oral histories from his children, people who knew him, some students. We have students oral histories, I believe, of some of the students who were in the Creek Indian Nation here in Alabama. So it's just really amazing. And what's most amazing, Robbie, is that my mother's mother was born here in Opelika, Alabama, which is about 45 minutes away. My great grandfather and grandmother on my mother's side went to Tuskegee Institute. And so this is like a full circle experience for me to be here that I don't take lightly. And of course, I love my parks, but it's something about Tuskegee. That's where my heart is because of my family. So I take more of a personal interest there that I have to kind of manage because, you know, some people may get a little jealous. But yeah, I love being here. It's really incredible to give back.
You have had an incredible career and have had to have a willingness to throw yourself into new situations and to pick up and move. That must have been incredibly challenging. And you juggle, it sounds like at every stop, you're juggling a million different things. As the superintendent there, how would you describe what you do on a day-to-day basis?
A day-to-day basis. So primarily, I have a budget that's pretty extensive. It's just shy of $4 million. Then I have other project money that I have to manage. Then I have, and when I say project money, I have a $10 million project in Selma. And then Booker T. Washington's home is about to get renovated, and that's about an $8 million project. And then I have a $3 million project for the Carver Museum that's actually about to go into renovation mode. And then, you know, I get funds from the National Park Foundation. They have people who are interested in my parks, who are donors, who are known and unknown, who I have to talk to, speak with, and engage. And then I have a ton of meetings with the White House on certain initiatives that our park is connected to. The director of the Park Service, I have meetings with them once a month. And then I have meetings with my regional higher ups to let them know things that are happening. I have meetings with my congressional leadership here, Congresswoman Terry Sewell, as well as, you know, certain things that she needs or wants to know. I have to create talking points for that, make sure my boss reviews them, talk to him about, you know, certain things happening. I have meetings with the mayor of Selma, the mayor of Tuskegee, sometimes on a weekly basis, depending upon what's happening at Moton Field at the Tuskegee Airmen site. You know, Lionel Richie may fly in from LA to Tuskegee to his home. And, you know, there's certain things we, you know, have to do here in preparation. You know, it's just a normal day in Alabama. Oh boy. Tuskegee Airmen, you know, constantly call me, not just from this area, but other parts of the country, wanting to know things, wanting us to be involved in things. So it's been great. John Lewis, you know, people are wanting an opinion from me about the bridge being renamed, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is a Confederate memorial, you know. So it's stuff like that that happens, Robbie, where people want to know what I think about things, where, you know, I can't really, I have to be very careful in what I say, what I do, where I go. I was at a funeral one time recently and confronted about some stuff. You know, it's just a lot. You know, you're constantly criticized too as a superintendent for decisions you make that you think are good, but sometimes they may not be the most people, but you have to weigh risk often. That's pretty much what I do every day.
So, and it sounds like your dad was in this situation as well, working for a major federal agency that was, entrenched in kind of the traditional white power structure, right? But
Yeah.
working at very intentional Black museums, now Black parks for you, where you have to engage issues in history that is seen in the eyes of that power structure as controversial, as complicated, right?
Yes.
How do you navigate those waters? What's your philosophy for handling those things now that you mention the type of stress that you have to find yourself in?
Robbie, it's funny. I find that I have to know the legislations in my park, what they empower me to do, what they authorize me to do. I've put it to memory, a lot of the things in the legislation. It takes a little while to memorize that, but that's really my work plan, and if it's in there, then you can't tell me I can't do it. So that's how I get around anyone telling me no, so that's it. And I've been doing that for a long time. One of my mentors told me to do that. And a couple of my colleagues do that too. And my mentor has mentored a lot of different Black women, and she's told all of us, memorize your legislation. You've got to. It is connected to everything you do. Your budget, your work plan, your appraisal at the end of the year. I mean, everything. So that's been my secret weapon in every place I've been, So it's been helpful to do that.
What are the biggest challenges and rewards in doing that work?
The biggest challenge I would say is not having enough money, because you can think you have enough and you don't. And then you have to adjust things. And then sometimes people can't know about the lack of funding, and, sometimes you disappoint people. And it can get tough when, you can't tell people the real deal. It is so tough, Robbie. Sometimes you're looked at as a liar, but you lose your job if you told people certain things that you just can't talk about. So I've tried my best to assess things early on, and in some way, things have shifted in a way to where it wasn't a huge blow, but it was a blow. And, I just kind of got through it. But there are times where my ideals and leadership, higher leadership's ideals haven't been on the same page, and navigating that has been a struggle. But, I've found that I have to document things as a historian. You have to let people know why you're doing things. And I have actually gotten certain people to change their decision based on writing an email and citing policy. And if you want me to do this, just know it's going against policy 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then they'll change their decision, or I'll just have it documented. So if there's an investigation, there's a paper trail that went to every decision maker. So that's something I've learned too, and I've had to put into action more than I've wanted to do. So we could talk about that all day, Robbie. I've had some experiences. Rewards. Oh my God.
Rewards, yeah.
Rewards. You know, getting people through college, getting people through grad school, hiring people who, you know, I had to take a gamble on, who are superintendents now. People who, just are doing fabulous work. I look at Ashley Jordan. She used to work for me when she was starting graduate school at Howard. She worked for me at the Bethune home. And to see her right now in her position is just amazing, talking her through some things at times, not just her, but other people, I've mentored. That's a reward. I don't know. I'm sure there are other things, but that's really the most impactful thing, kind of keeping the door open for others to come through. That's what my father did, and that is, I think, the most important thing for me is to keep the door open for other people.
And Ashley Jordan is one of the subjects of this oral history collection, and we have talked to her as well, and also a fellow board member of the Association of African American Museums, which is a nice segue. I'm wondering if you could talk about your experience with AAAM as an organization and your relationship to it today.
I'm gonna try not to cry. So, when I was doing my research on my father, I just did not know that he was part of the initial meeting. I did not know how close he and Charles Wright were. They were fraternity brothers. They were in Omega Psi Phi fraternity together. And when my father died, Charles Wright did a statement about him. He and my father wrote one another. When I was there doing research in his collection, I just couldn't believe it. These are things that go unsaid. I had my first AAAM conference in Chicago the same time that Obama was was being nominated. We actually watched him take his acceptance speech in Chicago at DuSable at AAAM. They had rented a big screen, and it was just unreal to be in Chicago during that time. That was my first AAAM conference. Me and my mother went together, and it was just incredible to be there, to be around Margaret Burroughs and, John Franklin and Lonnie Bunch, and they were building the museum. And I remember Joy Bailey. She was doing the Lore Cultural Resource piece with just kind of imagining what the museum would be. And Vedette used to work for her. I remember that. That was my first AAAM experience. Of course, I've known about AAAM before that, but that was the first time I had actually taken time to go to a conference, and it was just really impactful. I actually got to be on a panel. They put me on a panel that year. I didn't apply to be on a panel, but somebody didn't come. And Margaret Burroughs said, "Get that Kinard girl." And I was on a panel with her and John Franklin, and I had just really started my research at Howard, and I just didn't realize they were giving me a platform then. They weren't looking at me like, John Kinard's daughter, they were looking at me, and they may have been, but they were looking at me like a professional too, because I was working for the Park Service. So it was just amazing, and then Margaret Burroughs gave me a piece of artwork that I still have here, and then she died, and, it was just incredible to be there. And then when I worked in Ohio in Wilberforce, Mr. Bill Billingsley, he was in Wilberforce. I think there's a collection there at the National Museum of African American, National African American Museum and Cultural Center. Yeah, because we work with them a lot because they had the Colonel Young collection. Dr. Fleming was very instrumental in preserving Colonel Young's collections that he was able to acquire when he was starting that museum. And so even being in Wilberforce with him, he lived about 15 minutes away in Yellow Springs where Dave Chappelle lived, and his mother, Dave Chappelle's mother, was very helpful to me there. And she started a Black Studies program in Ohio. It was just amazing. It seems like AAAM has always been around me, whether it's Anacostia Museum, me volunteering there, just people that I know in general who I talk to often. But just like I say, it's always been around me. When I was at the Bethune home, Betty Collier Thomas, the founder of the Bethune Museum and Archives, who got that site to become a national park, was instrumental in AAAM as well. And she was at the first meeting. And so, like I said, it's always been around me in some way. And then when I did my research at Howard, people were so awesome to open up to me. Rowena Stewart, Lonnie Bunch, so many who are even dead now. I have their oral histories. And so to hear their experiences in working together with my father and others and all of the struggles they went through sustaining the group AAAM is a whole nother thing. That's why I will take any opportunities to support sustaining it and helping us shift culture within it, because so many people did so much for us to be in this field, and they did a lot of sacrificing for us to have what we have.
And now you're a member of the board doing that work. What's your vision for the future of the organization and the Black museums field in general?
I just hope we can get more young people into the field. It is hard work working in museums, very ultra hard. It is not easy. Working weekends, working at night, sometimes not getting the support you need or the thanks. A lot of big name folks just don't care about what you're doing, and you don't do the work for any for any true attention. You just do the work because there's a need. I think what we do in preserving history are things that people, what you're doing will outlive you. And so that's why you do it, and you have to understand that that's the prize, but I would like Black museums to get more attention, more money, more funding. I would like to give more support to the executive director. I think she can be supported in a larger way. I think that we have a phenomenal board, and there are a lot of awesome ideas that I want to support. So, you know, I just want to kind of lean into what's already being done and just support it. You know, I really don't think there needs to be anything new, just supporting what we are doing, what we have done, but in a different way with a larger scope.
You mentioned the need to bring more people into the field. This is really the last question.
Oh.
What are your recommendations for those people who want to enter this field, and any other closing comments you might have?
I would say this is the best time to be working in the museum field. There are so many things happening right now in our country that are pivotal when it comes to the Black experience. You know, whether it's music or tech or civil rights. I mean, it's just an open sphere for you to do so much, either be a private contractor or have your own niche in a certain area. You know, there's just, the sky is so, the sky's the limit. I think that it's going to take a lot of work though. You really have to create a community, in my opinion, within the museum world, because that is ultimately how you survive. You can't survive alone in this field. You have to have allies. You have to have people who, you know, understand what you're doing, because times get tough, and you have to be able to pick up the phone and call people. You know, that's what I'm learning, that's what the greatest leaders do, is they have allies that help them, that listen to them, that, you know, secrets can be safe with, of what they're going through. And so I would just say to know that this is a awesome field, but just know that you have to build a community, and AAAM is the best place to build that.
Dr. Joy Kinard, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful. I know there are a million other things we could talk about.
I know.
Going for so long, but
know.
maybe we'll have to get together and revisit sometime soon. Thank you so
Okay.
much for doing
You're
that.
welcome, Robbie. Thank you so much.